bio. You've got a lot of interesting things you got behind you, and I'm going to be learning a great deal because you're very skilled with that web development and so forth, and so bear with my ignorance.
Well, I can't imagine ignorance about what, I don't know. Or maybe
About
of
the web and so forth. But anyway, it's really, we're really glad you could get here, and welcome very much to Conversations. Pleasure to welcome to the program Kirsten Stoffa, and she's a Stoffa, and she's a creative director at a company called Stoffa Productions, and she's a web designer, and she's got a creative story behind her life's experience that we're going to be talking about, as well as the perception of someone who's on the younger side of things than I am about cyber developments, digital developments that she's pretty familiar with. Among other things, we might say parenthetically, she's a member of a group, she's involved with the production here. It's called New Colors, or
actually it's called the Colors Project.
The Colors Project here at MNN, and it's really well done. And Kirsten, welcome very much to Conversation.
Well, thank you for having me.
My great good pleasure. You got an interesting bio and a resume and so forth, but I wonder if maybe you would share with myself. I know you've been spending time down in New Orleans, but you come from New York. Could you share your own background? You know, where you were born and raised, some of your education, and I know you've also spent time in Brazil. There's a great deal, but could you just sort of share your own background for us, please, and then we can talk about your life's experience and then some of the developments, cyber developments and other things you become interested in.
Okay, well, if I were to give a quick synopsis of my life, I was definitely born in New York and then quickly moved to Austin, Texas, quickly being 10 or 11 years later.
That would be with your parents,
With
I
my family, yeah.
They were involved in a business sense that took them there or something, or?
No. Just, I mean, jobs, you know, my father's a professor and my mother's a neurologically specialized pediatric physical therapist. She has an extremely long title.
Yeah, that's right. What's your dad a professor of, if I may?
He's a professor of geophysics and
geophysics? That's different than astrophysics, I guess.
Certainly, it's physics of the Earth.
Oh, it's an interesting field. That's not geology, that's not geography.
No, and in fact, I think he would consider geologists are soft scientists in his mind. So, I don't know if these divisions mean anything to me or to you, because certainly it's not my specialization, but it's his.
But you probably talked some with him over the dinner table and that sort of thing and got some sense of what he's about.
Well, both of my parents are specialized in motion.
Motion?
Yes, because my mother is a physical therapist and my father is a physicist. And so I guess if the result, maybe you could say that would lead to an interest in film and video, which is mine.
Because
it's about moving pictures.
That's right, right. And it was an intellectually stimulating family setting, I would take it then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was extremely fortunate in my childhood, extremely. I traveled the world, not the whole of the world, but I spent time living in Europe and I spent time living in South America as well. And living in the Southwest and on the East Coast and traveling a great deal to the West Coast, you know, so I learned language learning. There were always intellectuals in my house from all over the world.
That's important, isn't it, I think, So and that was following your father's professional moving and lecturing at different places or studying,
Definitely. The reason why there would be intellectuals in the house, I guess I was just brought up in a university setting, and education was a priority for both of my parents, you know. And so that was the pastime. I mean, it's fun.
So you had interesting people. You had interesting people sitting around the dinner table and talking about things of interest, intellectually, so right?
Absolutely.
I'm still really interested because I did doctoral work in geography, and I found that very comprehensive, interested in everything. I think there should be a department of everything somewhere in the realm of learning, you know, because everything is interconnected in a certain sense, but it gets highly specialized. But geophysics, I don't want to put you on the spot, but geophysics, what is that exactly? Because I just am not familiar with it, and you know, I don't want to put you on the spot. Maybe it's not fair.
I mean, you know, if I were to summarize my father's, it might be interesting to speak of my father. He's a wonderful person and
Yeah.
certainly someone who I looked up to my entire childhood, because an easy way to describe him would be to describe him as a rock star. He's like a, a rock star. I always think
Rock
this is,
star being rocks. Oh,
you know,
that's a
it's
little
funny.
foreign. You mean
It
you
is
mean rocks
corny.
like stones? You mean? Yeah.
But that's not
Yeah.
really what he
All right, I
studies.
know.
But the point is
Yeah.
that there was this theory that came out in the late 60s and the early 70s called which was about plate tectonics, and
Yeah.
that was the school that he came out of, and that happened here at Columbia in New York. And so because he was part of a very small group of people who proved this scientific theory, there was a great bit of prestige and
Sure.
um,
Of plate tectonics itself.
plate tectonics, which of course is the moving of the Earth's plates through time.
Right.
So, and showing that that actually happened, and then doing all the progressive models to demonstrate the different positions that the plates
It's
were
really
in.
interesting. That had to be proved. I thought we knew that forever, but apparently we didn't. That's a relatively new thing for us
It's
to
very
know.
in proving it is it's pretty new.
Yeah. Okay.
And I guess the trajectory of his career evolved from that to being somebody who has expertise in chaos theory and using sound sampling to give measurements on the density of the Earth's crust, which of course can tell you exactly what the Earth is all the way down to its core.
Wow, that's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's very.
And it came out of physics then. Yeah?
Well, I mean, you can't. You measure if you measure sound waves, you know, as they're transmitted through the Earth's crust to give yourself a composite of what the Earth looks like. You have to use physics.
Yeah.
There's no other way.
Yeah, physics is a grounding discipline for much of the hard science. Yeah, that's great. Well, it's really wonderful. You have siblings and so forth in the family, and
yes,
did you all
I have an
stay
older
together?
brother.
Did the family sit around the piano and sing songs? Was it a
Everyone
emotional thing that was
no,
goes
no, our
beyond just the
family is
intellectual?
just very individual.
Okay.
Always lived in kind of a house where everyone could get into their own space and their own world. So
that's the same with me. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the way it
we
was.
definitely came together over the dinner table to have conversations, and Sunday dinners were very important and remain so. However, everyone wanted to read books.
I know. That's the way it was with me too. I loved it actually.
So
I had a hard time getting away from the things I was involved in.
Exactly.
I once had a friend, or we did a program, a woman who was, they have this thing of IQ. They talk about IQ. I don't know, some people take question about measures, just certain things and everything. But she was the smartest person in the world. I don't know if you ever heard Marilyn Mock, Vosavant.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, she's the smartest person in the world. She had an IQ from the time she was 5 or 8 or something, 238. I mean, it was just above anything else, anyone else in the world. But she
was she functional?
Oh, very, very functional, very bright, very good, very warm, very bright, everything. And the thing being relative to what you said, I asked her what was her background like. She was out of St. Louis, and she said it was the family setting was very permissive, that they could just go and do whatever, read whatever you were going to do, and that I think that that's a kind of lifestyle that I really appreciate, both within the context of a family or within the context of the human society. I like the idea of people being able to be, in a certain sense, able to follow their own muse.
Oh,
you
well,
know?
absolutely.
I think it's creative. Yeah.
Independence was modeled, you know, from day one, how to be self-sufficient and independent.
And then you went to, how about your education, formal and so forth? Did you do that at
I mean, I was sort of bored in high school, and so I kind of rushed through. I got pretty bored, and then I did the same thing in college, rushed through, just trying to get to a higher level.
What were you studying? And by the time you get in university, you begin to specialize in something. What were you doing, or did you?
Yeah,
Or could you avoid that trap?
Yeah, I sort of looked at it as a trap. Yeah. I mean, I got a great education. I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and it was wonderful because 1/3 of my classes were in Portuguese, 1/3 of my classes were in Spanish, and 1/3 of my classes were in English. So I was constantly submerged in, and I was a Latin American studies major, so it made good sense, but I was constantly submerged in environments where I could exercise my mind in the sense of speaking other languages. And I always felt like that was very refreshing. I feel better if I speak a different language. If I speak Spanish or Portuguese, it just refreshes my mind. And
how many languages do you feel you can speak?
Those are the three.
Well, that's 3. That's good, yeah.
And so I felt, you know, that I was getting a lot out of being there, but I was also in a hurry to get somewhere else. And I think it could have been a product of my age, but basically I started college at 17 and finished when I was 20. And then I went immediately to graduate school, which to me feels like the second half of college.
How did you, okay, that's good. How did you come to be interested in Latin America? How did you pick up
Well,
that?
because I
And what
lived in
branch of it?
that comes from
Yeah.
my childhood as well,
Right,
because I'd spent time living in Brazil and
with your dad and
Sure.
your family, yeah.
sure, and become
And he was
fluent.
teaching down there or something?
Absolutely.
What part of Brazil?
In the northeast.
Oh, up in Bahia? is it?
Yes,
Yeah.
city of Salvador or Bahia.
And how long were you there and at what years?
That was actually the first year that I went was 1985 and 86.
And
So-
I don't mean to pry, you would have been in your
I would have
teen
been
years or
just on the edge of my critical language learning period, which would mean that I turned 12 while I was there.
something?
And because of it's a fortunate thing, because you know my family made the decision to put me in school, in a Brazilian school, even though we knew many Americans and they would send
Brazilian
their children
public school? Or
private.
Brazilian private school?
Well, that
Yeah.
and that speaks to a whole different
Yeah, it does, class thing.
part of
Yeah.
Brazilian
Right,
culture,
right.
but it was a private school, but it was Portuguese speaking. It wasn't an American school, and they have private American schools there as well. And that's a common thing in the U.S. We have private schools in different languages as well. But
Yeah.
so I made the decision to go. Actually went to a school called Anchieta, and then it doesn't really matter that much. But I learned to speak Portuguese really quickly because all my peers were speaking.
You have a knack for language, do you think?
I don't think I have the knack. I would say that it's exactly what I described in the beginning, which is that your critical language learning period ends at a certain point.
Yeah, I heard that you say that.
So when you're
That's
a child,
interesting,
when you're a child, especially if you're, say, between the ages of 3 and 5,
yeah, we're learning like crazy.
you can learn 6 languages, 12 languages. It doesn't really matter, and we don't. I think it would, it would be interesting if more people would take the opportunity to teach children multiple languages. But I think it was just because I was the youngest in my family, I absorbed it really quickly.
How many siblings were there?
Just one older brother.
Older brother. How's he doing?
He's doing great.
Okay, this language thing. I once was, when I was young and foolish, even more foolish than I am now, if you can imagine. But I went and hitchhiked all through the Middle East with practically no money, just learning. And I got a ride with a fellow one time in Turkey. He was an Armenian who was born in Iran. So he spoke Armenian, Farsi, and then he went and did business. And he had a big truckload of stuff he was taking to Tehran, and he was talking to me in idiomatic English, I remember. And I asked him how many languages, because he said he could speak, as he was speaking to me in English, perfectly conversational, 24 languages. And, it's pretty amazing when you think of that. The brain, we only use 1/10 of our brain paper. It's not like it's a thing that gets filled over to capacity. We can learn a great deal more. And we're suited to learn languages at a certain age. That's a very interesting concept in itself.
I think this
and does it
speed-
apply to other things? Like one of the things, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
the young people coming along, I'm really impressed that one of the most encouraging things that I see in the human condition now is that the young people, you're young, and the younger, even people younger than yourself even, that we've had this thing where, in terms of technology coming, that, it used to be we didn't have anything we had to program in terms of a technology. You turn the radio on, it would work, and there wasn't anything there. You could hit and then along came the VCR, video cassette recorder. 75% of them were flashing 12 because the generations out of which I come and so forth, they couldn't figure out how to program the darn thing. You have to do this. And now you've got a generation of youthful people like yourself and others who have learned how to make the computers work. It's so complicated, and it's so Boolean. It's so, you know what I'm saying? It's like a language, and they've learned it at their mother's knee without, like through osmosis. They didn't even have to read a book. They just picked it up. I want you to help me set me straight on all that. That all the young people seem to just know how the computers work, and it's like having learned a language. Or do you see a comparison with that? And maybe we would want to address that. But
well, I think there's a difference between that and language learning.
okay.
You could maybe make an argument that a new language will evolve. And I think that's a different step. Then I think we're breaking into the realm of social theory, which I'd be interested in talking about. But I think when it comes to computers, at the point where we are now, we are using them, it's not a language, it's literacy. It's still literacy.
It's
I would call
literacy.
it media literacy.
Okay.
And so what's changing is the printing press, which is evolving into a new form, you know, and our ability to replicate information is speeding up.
It is exponentially so, it seems.
Right.
Nearly so, yeah.
So we can replicate information faster, and that has been called literacy since the 1500s, since the advent of the printing press, right? So to call it a language, I don't know.
Well,
I
the
think
thing
it's a
that
jump
interests
that I
me-
wouldn't make.
It seems to me interesting.
How could you put that argument together?
No, I'm just saying they seem to just pick it up like you don't learn to talk. You're just in the environment. If you're in the environment, now whoever remembers going to learn how to talk? You didn't learn, you just learned by living. You just pick it up. Kids pick it up. And when they're coming out of the womb at 1 year old, they're learning so fast. It is just incredible. It just slows down right from there, I think. But that they learn a language, you don't have to be taught to talk. You have to be taught to read, but you don't have to be taught to talk. And they learn it so easily, and they seem, the youthful people, just seem to understand the computer.
I think that they have
Maybe
to be...
you don't understand what I'm saying because you're young, and everybody you know knows how to make the computer sing like Vladimir Horowitz plays a piano.
Well, there's gradations of literacy, and I just had the pleasure of spending time with my niece and nephew, and it was interesting to me because I was teaching them how to edit video and put video together. It was interesting to me to see them put the same thoughts that I would put together and really be stunned by the software. But see exactly, they'll have a technical understanding what this could do, but they don't know where to go on the screen and what to press and what to make it,
How old they are?
10 and 7.
They're pretty good. Okay. But you
very
understand what I'm talking about. Because you get a 10-year-old, they come in and they play the computer with such skill. And they say everybody knows the Zorch connects to the Zilch. The older generation just doesn't know what it is. And if you don't know what it is, you have to push button A. If you don't know that, you can sit there forever and not know.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it's a new language yet. I
Okay.
think we're on the verge of creating a language, and I think it would be really interesting to be a part of a think tank that was involved in this process. Because if you looked at, and I always talk about this is something that has fascinated me I've been thinking about it for, I don't know, maybe 10, 11, 12 years now.
Share it.
I just think if we cataloged, and bear with me if we move to video for a second, if we cataloged the way that we've communicated visually and put it into a database.
The way we've communicated visually with media?
With film.
With film, okay. That'd be 100 years or so we've had that.
Right, why not catalog it? Because there's all these abbreviations in there. And so...
I'm not sure what you understand, abbreviation.
I guess...
Not abbreviation.
Anyway, it's, to make a database of everything that we've used to...
Visual.
Yeah, which is shortened versions of communicating. Then you have language. Because I think language comes about when everybody knows that when I say cup, I'm referring to this.
Yeah. Right.
So if you have something in a piece of film where a door is closing and everybody knows that means someone left the room, even though you don't see anyone leaving the room, then that is language. That's different. Then all of a sudden you could have a child come along and imitate that, and they could be in mid-conversation, they could shut the door, and everybody in the room knows that part of the story is they left.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so then you've
There's
made
a whole vocabulary.
Then
there,
you've made the leap into language.
You made a leap into a language where you can convey things body percept even, or being able to perceive things in a more, it was like, I think it was Homer, I'm not sure if it was play, I'm not sure, but it was at the time of the phonetic alphabet. Marshall McLuhan used to say that the Western civilization was predicated upon the phonetic alphabet, where we begin to string things out linearly. And it was Homer, I think, they did not want to let the poet into the writing of poetry or writing into the Republic, because as I said, it will, if you write it down, you will create forgetfulness in the learner's mind. coming out of an oral tradition
Sure.
where there was this acting out. And so it's really, you know, that's a thing where the alphabet came, and then we had writing, and we had that kind of, now we're getting back, and if we went back further than that, when we were on the Serengeti Plain 200,000 years ago, we were sensing everything multisensorily all at once, rather than stringing it out along linear patterns of perception. Now we're getting back to where we haven't been able to do the visual until 100 years ago or so.
Right.
And so now we're coming into a multimedia, multisensorial mode of perception, which is like pattern recognizing, which is a big transition in terms of consciousness itself, perhaps. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
No, I do.
Closing quotes
well,
on
it's interesting that you bring...
Eden.
Right, you bring up, okay, so we're in the Serengeti and we're using multisensorial perception. And
Embedded in nature.
And what's the difference between then and now if we start to be able to use multisensorial perception through our tools?
Yeah, through our media of communication.
Or through tools, because...
Or tools, yeah. Tools are extensions of our consciousness. They're all extensions of our consciousness, and when we create them, it's like
So does
Joyce
that mean
said,
that we're coming out of the Dark Ages?
well, that's my own perception. I
Okay.
think we're coming to a moment of like in punctuated equilibrium.
Another enlightenment?
Another enlightenment, no, on a large scale perhaps. You know, in punctuated species, evolving of species. We've been coming along the Himalayan, you know, we had Australopithecine, and then Homo erectus and Homo habilis, and then 200,000 years ago, new reflective consciousness called Homo sapien sapien appeared 10,000 generations ago, and there will be a transition from that which we've been in for 200,000 years, and we may be on the point of realizing a new relationship to cosmos at a comprehensive, in terms of the evolution of universal. We may be speciating in a sense, like a speciation, quantitative change, and the speciation happens quickly, and we may be at that kind of a break point with when we first emerged 200,000 years ago, is my perception of where the human condition is. And a big transformation, like leaving the womb, and you can't know what it's like outside until you, and it may be we're going to be stillborn or something. We may blow up the whole world, which we have the capacity to do now, which we have not had.
Or maybe we blow up worlds all the time when we reach a certain capacity. I mean, the other argument, of course, that would be that maybe there's a certain point that a species like ours reaches, at which point they blow up the world and leave it, and then they go somewhere else and try to explain, don't blow up your world.
Well, I don't know about that. As far as I can tell, I mean, your dad and everything, but Carl Sagan used to try, they put up SETI, and they're trying to get, I mean, it's an amazing time to be alive. They finally got a telescope now, where they call it WHAM or something. I forget what they call it now, but they got a telescope that's been able to get the shock wave of the Big Bang within only 370,000 years from the birth of the universe 13.7 billion years ago. They've got a photograph of the shock wave. And they've got a thing in place now, the financing for LISA. It's a telescope system that they are going to get a picture, quantum mechanics, they're going to get a picture of the universe within 1 second of the birth of the universe of this universe. Maybe they're parallel universes, string theory signal. But you get that, they're going to picture within 1 second of the birth 13.7 billion years ago. The measure of that whole vast expanse is being done by the extension of our consciousness. And we live at a time of qualitative transformation. That is pretty exciting and also very frightening to many people, because there are huge changes that the future would allow or require, that the traditional systems in which we interrelate politically and economically and so forth are not able to be accommodated to what's required.
I see what
you
you're
understand?
saying. Yeah, you're getting to the point where you talk about what do we do to get a convergence of consciousness where everyone all around the world can agree to abandon things like the nation construct. Why aren't we acting as one?
I like the term convergence. Teilhard de Chardin, have you picked up on him at all?
No, I
He used the
haven't.
term convergence, your mega point. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
You know, it's just like a poetic thing, you know. Sometimes one of the things that keeps me, I guess, at somewhat of I'm very interested in theory, but I like the freedom to draw words without having to necessarily know whose words they were in the beginning. So maybe hopefully that's a sign of my own evolution, because why couldn't we, when we're speaking, just credit everyone who came before us and sort of recognize that the knowledge that we're standing on is knowledge from others,
That's
but
certainly the
to
beginning
be too specific about who it is. But anyway, so
Yeah,
convergence
right.
is a word that floats around a
Yeah.
lot these days, and
Yeah.
I like it. It makes good sense.
I think it's a good word, yeah.
But
yeah.
I mean, what you were talking about and quantum mechanics, of course, always is interesting in the debate between quantum mechanics and who was it?
You know,
Heisenberg
Field,
and
yeah.
and
Uncertainty principles.
the uncertainty principle and
Well,
Einstein and
yeah.
which side are you on and all that.
I know, isn't it an exciting time to be alive? You could have lived to 100,000 years ago and you wouldn't have any idea. Well, I mean, intellectually taking the measure
it's hard for
of
me.
things, you know.
It's hard for me to make that claim.
Mhm.
Would I have known nothing 100,000 years ago were I alive? That's a very difficult claim for me to make.
Okay.
Because there's two arguments.
Okay.
I mean, I fully believe in evolution, but
Yeah.
who's to say how many cycles evolution goes through,
Right.
and what kinds of intelligence were around 100,000 years ago, and whether they got recycled into the current, structure of humanity, and there were occasionally there was a really brilliant person who got the whole thing, and they were instantly wiped out because they wouldn't survive.
I don't think there's evidence in evolution of there being a consciousness like what is to emerge in Homo sapien. Do you see anything there? I mean, there was 65 million years ago, they did it in the dinosaurs, made way for the millions, but
I mean,
is there any record of anything that would be comparable to human consciousness or intellectual
for instance,
understanding?
if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, I would immediately say you were talking about the multisensorial perception on the Serengeti plane.
That would be
multisensorial perception on a Serengeti plane. If you can sense your environment without tools, is your brain not functioning at 100% capacity?
I don't think so, because it's suffering. For one thing,
I'm just being
I know,
the devil's
I understand.
advocate.
It's perfectly good question. It's perfectly right.
And all of a sudden, we take all this time to get back to the same point.
Yeah, we're getting back.
We
That's
began.
no, that happens to be the way I feel about things. It isn't very popular or thought of as because most people are caught up with the everyday, the news and so forth. But that we're closing quotes. We were embedded in nature, and we had an extrasensory, multisensorial relationship to the environment, much like the creatures have. They don't extend knowledge in terms of knowing with our, prefrontal cortex and so forth.
Absolutely.
We do now. We couldn't know that it was 13.7 billion years ago that there was a Big Bang explosion that started the universe. We had to make up reasons for why the lion was the king
I mean,
or something.
just out of curiosity and speculation, do you think the ants think about it? I mean,
it's a different level of consciousness.
But they certainly act in unison, don't they?
They do indeed. They have a tremendous...
And we're very insect-like.
Yeah. We're very what?
Humans are very insect-like when you
think so?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of our behavior.
Edwin Wilson likes the ants a lot. He studies
it.
Concilians.
I should look him up.
Yeah. Anyway,
because I believe that we do act like insects a lot, and I think it's hard to say what pictures we're painting. We're social animals. We're all interconnected, but I think there's a conflict between those segments of humanity that act more insect-like and those segments of humanity that are more tribal. And the argument would be, how do we get both the insects and the tribally oriented groups of humanity to come together into one?
Well, I think it's probably true. The Vedics have been telling us for a long time that it's all of reality, let's just say, to go really into geophysical and everything. It's all a seamless web. It's all one system, and all these divisions that we try to get an understanding of it are really not the Gaia principle.
How do you get the reflection of self to include unison, in terms of this consciousness?
The other creatures and the ecology and so forth? You mean?
Yeah. I guess.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. Maybe we're being forced to learn if we're going to, as they say, make it in terms of, because we have this tremendous capability now. We used to have the bow. We had a spear point, then we had a bow and arrow, then we had a musket, then we had a rifle, then we had a tank, and then we had a dreadnought, then we had a B-25, then we have atomic weapons, and apparently we now have extensions of consciousness so powerful that if there was to be an unleashing of it in a spasm of hatred and war like we've been doing with alarming regularity, particularly the last century, apparently it would mean the end of our species. I mean, that's an existential kind of new reality that has not been characteristic of before about 1970.
It seems to propose that we're more connected than we realize
perhaps.
Because if you look at us as a social animal, which
Mhm.
of course, I mean, this is a very simplified principle, and many could argue against it, but if you look at us as a social animal, whether we will it or not,
Yeah, right.
as individual cells of
Yeah.
that animal,
Uh-huh.
if we as humans despise ourselves, then we're willing to destroy ourselves. So
Well, it may be a race.
even if it's only one mind that goes that way
Uh-huh.
and makes these sorts of decisions, they're a reflection on all of humanity.
Well,
so
it's a pretty bad visit. One person could set off a releasing of destructive capability that would destroy all of humanity. Michio Kaku, the physicist, would even say the weapon system, he studied with Teller, the weapon systems are so terrible with particularly biological things and messing with nature and that it may be that we are finally in the position with our capability to destroy not only Homo sapien, but life. And that this planet, you know, and that's a more precious liaison in the universe because Carl Sagan notwithstanding, this is the only place we know where there's a countervailing element, the biological evolutionary process running across entropy and bringing some conscious pattern of understanding the process of which we're a part. Life is a very important liaison, and we live at a time where we may be able to extinguish that. Or we may be at a time of qualitative transformation like a birthing to a new relationship to the cosmos that would be like transcending from when we move from
or we could just
Homo
be in someone's
habilis to Homo
fishbowl.
sapiens. A big what?
I said, or we're in someone's fishbowl and they
Or
come
maybe
and check
we're in
on
some,
us
well,
every
that's
once in a
another
while.
thing. This program,
They're like
yes, right. This program you're doing here with your fellows here, I mean, I'm sorry, we can talk for hours, but the thing is, you were in Brazil and you were learning, we were talking about language and all that, and then you got, in the program you're doing here with the fellows, what's it called, the Colors Project? That's where there's, on the assumption that people have come from another planet or something, or they're aliens, and they're trying to understand this world?
Well, they're one with humanity, as in they're the same as humans, but they come from a different planet, so they're aliens, and they're thinking that they could assimilate, and so they return to Earth by way of a portal. And when they return, they arrive and they find out that they can't communicate. They've forgotten. So the challenge is how to communicate, which is interesting, I think, along the lines of what we're talking about, because that is always the challenge. And I think there's probably a balance between your failure to communicate and your ability to communicate, which is life-sustaining.
Right.
You know?
That's the theme of the program, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Or the series that you're doing,
Sure.
right?
So
And it's a little bit about what we're thinking about, too. And a lot of people feel in that alien status, particularly if they look at the foolishness of what we see on the news every day and so forth. And the absurdity is like theater of the absurd in many people's mind in terms of the inappropriateness and the inability for us to do what we're collectively able to do in a living sense.
I have a hard time turning on the news because
I
consider it the colonization of my consciousness.
Okay.
And so I tend to avoid it, and I do feel that I was exposed to quite a bit of it already, and for many years. And so and people always argue again, you can't avoid it, you have to pay attention to what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
So if you're going to create your own reality, then you should avoid it, because someone is actually booking time in your mind every time you sit down to watch the news, and you know, I mean, you get used by that process. So it's a decision that we all have to make, like how much do you, because I believe there are other things that we can be tapping into, and potentially because it's what I do professionally. I'm in the world of the web, and I believe that slowly we are going to evolve away from television.
Away from television toward computers?
Sure, and so
and
then
you see
media
that
will
distinctly
change.
different, right?
Yeah, there's a distinct difference between you talk about things that scare you, like the potential to extinguish all life.
Yeah, that does kind of. I got 4 grandchildren now. That kind of gets to me in a personal level. You know?
And I understand completely. You know, I have
and a lot of good friends.
Absolutely.
And
I have a lot of apocalyptic fears myself. But the fear that they would take away our ability to express ourselves is a bigger. It seems more salient to me currently. Maybe
more
it's
under
just
threat. More under threat
well,
by reality.
Some of these things are just the current battle that you're waging. I mean, what am I doing on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
I'm making media, and I want to maintain that ability to make my own media. So my biggest fear is that the country regresses. Like I see, you know, where we live, okay, that we go backwards in time too much. Like people get threatened by the web and then try to seize control of it and then make it more like television, which when I watch the way television controls people, and I'm fond of television.
Yes, I know. Well, we're involved in television here, cable television, which is a little different than television. Yeah, right. But understanding the media is really important. Marshall McLuhan used to talk about.
But I believe in media literacy, so I think, great, if you book time watching this program, it's a choice and you're interacting with it and you're accessible to someone who's watching this program. Making it media inaccessible to people, which is what happens with television these days.
Making media inaccessible, did you say?
Yeah, making media inaccessible, intentionally making media inaccessible.
Mind control, you mean, or no?
I called it colonizing the consciousness, only because all you have is time.
Have you trademarked that term?
No.
It should be a bumper sticker.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
I don't know. All you have is time. So every time you sit down in front of passive media, you are giving your time to someone else.
Right.
And that's life. So you're giving your life away.
Right.
And that's always been of concern when we talk about humanity throughout time. It's how people have spent their time, you know. We decided that slavery was unethical a long time ago.
Finally.
But I would, then we can get into a whole other theoretical argument that it's not over, but, and I fully agree with that.
A lot of people are still enslaved. A lot of people are enslaved economically. If a mother's got less than $1 a day and she's got 2 kids, and which one's she going to let starve to death, that's a state of consciousness that is not conscionable among, you know, and that's the state of half the population of the world perhaps lives on a situation.
Absolutely.
You know, so I mean, and it's also debt slavery, and the systems that are in place are out of keeping with what the potential for a living, liberating capability of the human individual and collective spirit.
Right.
That is a challenge that our leaders seem not to be able to come forth with. They're caught up with systems that are outdated in terms of what we've inherited out of history.
Absolutely.
That's been transformed. The ontology's been changed by some sort of a development comparable to that destructive capability, something positive is trying to be born but can't be realized by our leadership as we listen to it on the news or in the public
when
domain.
we sit down and...
You feel, does that make sense to you? It does to me.
But the question is, how do you find the people with...
Vision.
Yes. Because it almost seems that we get separated, all of us, somehow. So, and I think we could get into other topics there about why cities are great, or why think tanks are important, and how to get these groups of people to collect together, and how the modern workday has really prevented that in many ways.
Yeah.
So that people who do care could actually be making decisions. There's fearful leadership. I guess we're all tired of leaders who lead by fear.
Well, they always have, I think.
So you go to work for a set period of time, and then you come home from work, and you turn on the television, and then you book time with those programs like Survivor, which don't really teach cooperation.
It can be seen in a certain... I know they don't at all. You're going to throw off the island now. I mean, it's just like the thing is, you don't watch Comedy Channel or something to try and get a sense of...
Every once in a while.
The kids are... I mean, I like Stewart and Colbert. I don't know who one likes the best, but they have that... Because a lot of people, they don't watch news. They say, because it's absurd. You know, the news is they got no... But anyway, when did you pick up your interest in the media? We left you up in Bahia, and you were studying Portuguese and learning with the family. And when did you pick up your interest in the media? And I know you've got a real active interest in that now. And I'm really pleased to know that you're joining us in a certain sense here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, because I'm of the opinion that's where the real ideas are going to come forth out of the milieu that the public access and the open source internet is providing humanity. But when did you get interested in the media, if we could?
Well, my first semester of graduate school...
Tulane?
At Tulane.
Yeah.
I realized that I wanted to make things, and that I felt really constrained by... I love to write. It's kind of a natural thing for me to do, but I felt very constrained by the idea that my ideas would only be transmitted through text, It literally
You mean
scared
through,
me.
through the written word?
Yes, words on a page.
Right.
And,
well, I know.
and it looked like the trajectory of my life, because I was ready to go through and get my PhD and do all of that work. In fact, I got to the point of doing my PhD, of writing my dissertation, and I said I want to make a film. And the university.
What were you going to do the dissertation on? You had the subject. You had a committee. You were
Yes.
a candidate. And everything?
Yes.
And what caused you to abandon? What was the stop?
They wouldn't support filmmaking as a
Okay.
part of the
Right.
process.
Mhm.
And I said I was willing to deal with the archaic text that they required and provide that as well, but
Yeah.
I also would like to put it together as a film so that more people could be exposed to it.
It's like they wouldn't
And
let the alphabet into Plato's Republic, and they won't let the multimedia into the literate world that is a metaphor for organizing society. They don't want to give up on. It's linear. It's linear.
Mhm.
I've used that example. Others.
And
they
I have to say something
Yeah.
to Tulane's credit. That wasn't Tulane.
No.
It was another university that I went to after Tulane. So
Oh.
I did my master's at Tulane, and then I went to another university, and it was at that university that I felt
Was that in Louisiana?
the other university.
Yeah, or was it in Texas?
No, it was actually in New Mexico.
New Mexico. Okay.
So,
Uh-huh.
and so I guess you could extrapolate.
So you
because
got
it's-
interested in the media, and they wouldn't support that. I really think people should learn how to. I think people are getting away from writing.
Mhm.
I really do. I think it's becoming multi-sensor. That's too visual. It's too visual. And it's the example I use, I'd ask you to ask me, this is a writer. I keep saying the same things for people who view, but Alexandra Fuller, all writing should be cinematographic. I think consciousness is
that's
becoming cinematographic. And Michener
Because that is the next potential for the evolution of language.
Because the media is now becoming multimedia, multi-sensorial, all at once. It's electric. And if you're like I've used this example, bear with me, audience, but Michener starts off the book Hawaii, 8 pages of beautiful literature describing a moment on a headland in Hawaii, and it's got, you know, the wind is on your face, and you got all this the sky is blue, all this stuff describing it, stringing it out linearly, that if you were standing there, you would experience it all at once, multisensorially in a pattern way. Do you understand? Instead of stringing it out linearly, and I think there's a conflict between a multisensorial, multimedia consciousness that looks for patterns, because we're very good at pattern recognizing. And we're coming back, we're being put back into the Serengeti plain, except we've got all the knowledge
Well, it would be
behind
wonderful if we could be more expansive about educating people along those lines.
along the media line.
Because you see
They
that
think of media as just entertainment. You know, and the real serious
not.
stuff is in long, another big fat
Right.
tome, huh, Mr. Gibbon? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, absolutely, I completely agree
You
with
do agree.
Yes.
Okay,
I-
that's a big
Because
issue.
it's the same as, you know, standing there in the 1500s or in the late 1500s, early 1600s in church while a priest read the Bible to you, and you were illiterate, so you couldn't check
Right.
this guy
No
was
fact
reading
checking.
out of the
No fa-
Bible.
yeah, right.
So how do
No
you know
spell
whether
check, yeah.
how
Yeah.
do you know what the story is that this person is telling you?
Mhm.
And the amount of control that was waged over populations, and we all know it was happening, you know, as a conquest, and then during those times, can be used exactly now in the same way, because you have millions of people all around the world staring at the television, having no idea how those images were put together.
Yeah,
You know.
it's a very cool medium, as McLuhan said, that kind of thing. It is, you know, it's there, and then they don't know how to. They had a thing. You ever hear Vance Packard? Vance Packard wrote a book called The Hidden Persuaders on the advertising industry. How well they can manipulate or know the human consciousness that if they take a red box rather than a blue box to sell the cornflakes, they'll get a million more sales. How well they can read the emotional.
They quantify emotions.
Yeah, they get it down, and they're what's scary is how close they can come to it. That's exactly what they realize. That people are able to be manipulated very easily by people who know their emotional fears and that kind of stuff.
Well, and none of these things are a surprise, but I guess the question is, why is enlightenment always hindered? So we come back to the same question.
Yeah.
What is the roadblock? What is the fear of you know, just to use the words of enlightenment, what is the fear of lighting people up all around the world?
Well,
Why are we keeping everyone in the dark? Why? What about, you know?
Well, for one thing, it's been a long,
It's a
long
challenge,
trail of
Christian, I guess.
winding up Mount Sisyphus. It's been a long 200,000 years. We're wandering around running away from leopards most of our time, and we were probably carrion for a good part of the time. It was pretty beastly. It's my perception of things in the old Stone Age and so forth. And it's been a long thing. And then we get to a certain point, and do you think there's any purpose in universe? Is there any, is universe embedded? Is there a universal consciousness? Buckminster Fuller used to say that there was a second law of thermodynamics, all systems move toward chaos. Now there's chaos theory, and he said biological evolution was an anti-entropic function in the universe to bring increased conscious pattern of understanding, the process of which we're a part. Is there any purpose to biological evolution?
We're oscillating
or
until
is it all
we
just chance and necessity, or what do you think?
Yeah, the age-old debate between whether it's chance or whether it's predetermined.
Or if there's purpose. People get a sense of is there purpose?
I like to follow the Hindu principle that it's
Okay.
a combination of fate and initiative, which is maybe off topic. So, you know, maybe it is 50% fate, and then the rest comes from just, well, your experience and then what you decide to do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of the, maybe the reason we can never answer that question whether within any discipline is because it's really a mixture of the two.
Yeah.
And for me,
yeah, I understand. Yeah, I know, and it's a big question of the age, and it may be that we
because you could get very philosophical about the word fate.
Yeah.
Well, what does it mean to be fated?
Yeah.
It means that I didn't have control over where I was born and what family I was born into.
It sounds too fundamentalist to me. To be in terms of, like, your dad's doing chaos theory and things, there's a certain kind of synergistic resonancy of indeterminacy that allows for everything, but you know what I'm saying? Synergy behavior systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. There's something more resonatingly more than the sum of the parts. You can't know until you get there. You know what I mean?
You mean?
So there's nothing fundamental in ontologic in terms of the whole universe. People are trying to get the measure of the whole universe with absolute certainty, fundamental, this the right, fate, you know, that kind of thing. When really it'd probably be a hierarchy of a priori mystery.
Not, you know, to simplifying is something that I have a tendency to do, but from what you just said, I would extrapolate something.
Please.
I would say you're talking about that other debate between what it means to be a scientist and what it means to be creative.
Oh.
To be a scientist is to negate until you can say something is absolutely true. And to be creative is to visualize the possibility of what could be without being hindered by...
You don't think a scientist can be creative?
Well, scientists are extremely creative. That's where hypothesis comes from.
Yeah.
However, to be a scientist and to present your theory, you have to go through negation. You have to say, well, I've proved that everything...
Or be open to it.
I've proved that it's not this, and it's not that,
right.
it's not this.
It becomes a generalized principle.
Then your hypothesis can go from the realm of hypothesis to
generalized principle, yeah.
But to be creative is not to be inhibited by that process of getting to principle.
Yeah.
So, you know, for my part, I've always kind of mixed
in between the two. Well, that's good. That's a
know.
good mix, yeah. Anyway,
But
we're getting a feel, and the trouble is everything's too darned interesting, you know, everything. But now, you got involved, when did you get involved in the media? You do web design and that sort of thing, and you got involved in filmmaking. We haven't hardly been able to scratch the surface.
So I said the first semester, my first semester at Tulane, I realized that I wanted to make films, not just watch them. And so I immediately started studying film because it just seemed to be the only choice I had.
Do you do it on your own and in a disciplined academic setting, or what?
Oh, well,
you can pick up on things on your own now very well, you know, because there is an internet, you know, an autodidactic paradise.
Well, this is a while ago now, because we're talking about 1994, so it's 12 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And I just started reading a lot at that point. So because that was what I knew how to do.
Yeah.
So I read a lot, and I went from reading to taking a class, and I took one class before I bought a camera, and then I bought a camera and I started shooting video nonstop. So I started shooting video.
About 95 or so?
Actually no, it took me till 96 to buy the camera.
Right, okay. What camera?
I had a little Sony Hi8.
All right, okay, right. It works.
It worked great.
I got the use of the third
And then I made a film.
Okay, you did. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't, I learned how to piece things together.
Right, okay.
And then I took an internship and worked on a documentary in New Orleans.
Okay.
I returned to New Orleans.
You were living in New Orleans for 10, 12 years or so, weren't you?
Well, I lived in New Mexico briefly, and then I returned to New Orleans, and I started working for a very independent post-production house called Aerial Montage. A lot of great work has come out of that place.
Where are they based? Where?
Aerial Montage is in New Orleans.
New Orleans, all right, yeah.
And so I had an internship there with Julie Gustafson, who...
I think I know that name.
Yeah, she did what was called the Teenage Girls Documentary Project, which ended up being a 10-year documentary where she tracked different girls from different neighborhoods in New Orleans specifically.
Great.
For 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. Like Apted did.
Yeah, she had a lot of funding, and I just worked on that project.
You interned with her then, in a sense, or with the company?
I interned with the editor.
Okay.
So actually the person who was directly over me was a man by the name of Tim Watson, who is a producer and who owns Aerial Montage now. But he was working in editing on this film, if that makes sense. Okay, and so I learned a lot about, it was Media 100 that we were working on at the time.
Yeah, right, Media 100, yeah. A lot of people liked it better than Avid even, I think.
Yeah, and actually my primary responsibility was interesting is I always use my ears a lot, but because I...
You mean in editing?
Yeah.
Yeah, multisensorial.
Well, I mean, just what I ended up being the best at was helping them transcribe the interviews, because in the Desire Housing projects, the dialect is very difficult to understand.
Okay.
And so I just transcribed so many interviews from teenagers in Desire.
Okay.
So, I went on from that to work on editing a fiction film. I was apprenticed to, it was a fiction film. And so I did a couple of internships, learned more about filmmaking, and just kept documenting the world around me.
And you picked it up, and then you started the editing Media 100. I heard you use. You got to be where you were pretty good with that. Yeah.
I would say okay.
That's non-linear, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Did
you do some linear editing and that pick up just on?
Did I ever get to use a flatbed?
Well, I don't know. That's a flatbed. That's film, but in video.
I wish that I could have. But
you have to go to a museum soon to get used to those things that the guys turned out those movies with.
Scorsese's film editor. She still edits in the flatbed.
Does she really?
Yeah.
Steenbeck, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you didn't do that. You're into the world.
I missed
Things are transiting to digital. Everything's transiting to digital. Everything's going to digital. I think everything's the main neural network of the planet is going to be the internet with multimedia content in rich dimension and so forth. It's got a big future out there. And then there's the need of producing creatively, communicating via this system in an educational context in the very best sense of the word, rather than having people, as they always do when a new medium comes, they see it as entertainment, whereas the old media is the real source of learning. But I think it's got a tremendous educational, consciousness-raising potentiality. It's really the place to be, don't you?
Yes.
Okay.
It's interesting. I think, a camera should be like a pen. Anyone should be able to pick it up and turn it into something. And then at the same time, I really, really, truly see the point in focusing on how a group can come together and make something. Because you can make something with so much greater creative and to make a building requires a team of people. It seems like some media projects require teams.
Yeah.
But I think certainly you should be able to write a novel with just a camera and a laptop computer where you edit.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be done now. Yeah, they got Final Cut, and you got things like the guys in the networks are using that.
But I'm finding as I go along that I'm more interested, if at all possible, in joining teams of people because of the potential. Just when minds come together.
Film is collaborative.
It is, but what I would argue...
Jamming in a jazz quartet is collaborative. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just argue that I like collaboration. I enjoy it.
Okay. Yeah.
For a long time, I needed to sort of hibernate or something where I could get comfortable. Yes. but I really like collaborating. But I think that there was a myth in filmmaking for a really long time whereby it was assumed that the individual couldn't make media, and I think that should be, now it should be attainable for everyone to make their own pieces without having to join
That's
big
again part of those things where you want the best of both worlds. You want to have a situation where that director, that executive, the director in all aspects can be available, and at the same time a collaborative context where you can do it. It's the best of both kind of worlds, but you want that creativity of the individual to be able to be realized without being stifled by groupthink. And the thing,
it's a tough balance.
Yeah, it's an important balance, but it's one to be able to work between. That's one of the things we want to try and do. What do you think? You're here, public access. You've got this career. You've done web design. You've got a company. We should let them know. Sure. And the problem is there's too much interesting going on in your life and in the universe. But you have a production company where you've done a number of web designs. You're doing that. And then you're doing this media project here at MNN.
Yes.
With the Color Project and other things. And you're looking to continue to work in the film and digital video world, I guess.
I feel like I might be just on the edge of being old enough to tell good stories.
Okay. Yeah. So you'd like to be able to tell stories
with a little bit of wisdom, hopefully.
With a little bit of hard-won wisdom, up Mount Sisyphus. Well, I think probably you got a really good shot at it. I'm really happy and proud to have you one of us here in a certain sense at MNN. I think there's a tremendous future for communicating in the realm of public access. It's sort of in league with the open source spirit. That's an important thing, don't you think?
I
to keep open
agree.
source and everything, because it could be gobbled up by things that aren't really creative.
It creates a lot of anxiety for me to think about the cost of doing what I do, of being able to be who I am if they take it into the hands of a few instead of many.
Yeah,
I think I've only been able to be who I am over the past 10 years because of having access to the web and
the impetus toward democratizing
media.
The process, so everybody's involved in this rather than just a few, which has been too much of history's story. And so we may be at a creative moment, and it seems to me you are really on the verge of that, and may you tell stories well and so forth. And
I hope so.
we had a little piece of tape. We weren't able to get it in because we've run out of time.
That's great.
I told you it would go too soon. It would go too fast. But what we'll have to do is we're going to show you a reel. You have a reel, and you have a lot of work you're doing. We're going to have to just try and get this program so people can see it, and then we'll make a link so they can see your tape or something.
Okay,
so,
sounds
there'll
good.
be ways in which we can let media be available.
Absolutely. We should definitely compress this and put it up online so people can see.
Well, we should do it, and then guards, safeguard. We did this vote. This is recorded on June 9th. We just got a bad vote in the Congress of the United States that threatens public access and open source. I think we ought to, all citizens, be aware of that. But thanks a lot. I'm sorry.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk. I mean, the trouble is you always run out of time. It's really interesting, and thanks for a real well-led life and for all your good work, and thanks a lot for coming in. I really enjoyed talking to you. Okay, it's your pleasure to have the perceptions in of Kirsten Stoffa. Correct?
Stoffa.
Stoffa. I'm sorry. I've got to learn Stoffa, and she's the creator.